By popular demand, it's finally here. You can now go to americansongwriter.com/merch to get your pitch list t-shirt before they sell out. Use the coupon code PITCHLIST, all one word, all caps, pitch list, to save 20% on your order. Hey everybody, Chris Lindsay here, and you're listening to Pitch List. Join us on a deep dive into the heart of what makes writing songs and making music so magical. Let's find out what makes songwriters tick, and along the way, remember why we love music. Welcome to Pitch List. My guest today burst onto the Music Row scene a few years ago. She came on strong and never looked back. Originally from Sterling, Kansas, she headed for Nashville and enrolled in Belmont University. She signed a publishing deal with Warner Chappell right after graduating, and the rest is history. She's written hits for Miranda Lambert, Keith Urban, Lady A, Florida Georgia Line, and many, many more. Hey everybody, this is Chris Lindsay, and you're listening to Nicolle Galyon on Pitch List. Good afternoon, Chris Lindsay here, and we've got an extra special edition of Pitch List today. I've been wanting to talk to this girl for a long time, and we finally got her talked into doing it. Our guest today is Nicolle Galyon. How you doing, Nicolle?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we've been chasing you for a couple seasons. I know you're a busy lady.
Oh man, I wish I would have known. I wouldn't have played so hard to get. I didn't know.
All right. Well, I was getting ready for the interview and I thought, man, I don't know how to attack this. You've got so many different things going on. It's so great. But we are a songwriting podcast, so let's start with that. Now, do you write for, is it Songs and Daughters? Is that your label or publishing company, or do you write for Craig, or who do you write for?
I actually write for neither of those. I've been a proud Warner Chappell writer since 2007.
Okay.
Coming up on, I guess next year will be year 15. It's the one and only publisher I've ever had, and I guess I like to say I married the first publisher I kissed. But I'm very happy. I write for Ben Vaughn and Company, yes. And Company, BJ Hill. There's been many regimes at Warner Chappell. BJ was the one that signed me back in the day, and he's been with me ever since. I never worked with BJ, but you can always tell about someone. All of his writers love him. We did, yes.
Every writer I've ever known that worked with him just loves him, and he's been there for a long time. Those are two things that are very good clues that he's really good at his job.
Yes, he's got a great ear, and he is just a great partner. So yeah,
fantastic. And so your writing career, it's been cooking now for a while, but man, you are. I resisted to have the girl talk with you. I've been here a long time, and I spent a lot of time in rooms with ladies writing for 25 years now. So there's been an ongoing conversation that's gone on, starting with Eva Matresa Berg, and then Amy and Hillary, Lori, being a mom, being in here's my question. Is the country songwriting game to you still a male dominated business?
Well, maybe the business overall,
right.
But I would say the writing community is more female than it's ever been, which it might not be 50-50, but of course I can't complain because I'm thriving, have been thriving for the last 4 or 5 years or more, but I I feel really proud of our community and the direction that we're moving. I'm also really proud of, I think a lot of that goes back to the way that a lot of the female writers are built that are a part of the landscape right now. I don't remember there being this many mothers that were working mothers as songwriters, and being a writer it doesn't matter if you're a parent or not. It's a really tough, it's a very competitive business, as you know. But I've never seen so many working mothers, and I love writing and really having camaraderie with so many other working mothers. Like, the first ones that come to mind are Laura Veltz, Jesse Alexander, Natalie Hemby, Sarah Buxton. It seemed, and this might be an unfair perspective, but when I was a student at Belmont and I was looking up at the landscape of the writing community that was really thriving when I was like 19, 20, 21, I didn't see a ton of working mothers. And I know that there were some, but it didn't seem to be as, I don't know, as much as there are now. So I don't know. I'm sharing the positive things that I'm saying.
No, I know. I think it's well put, and there didn't. That you got right where I wanted to go. It has changed for the better. There seems to be a lot of y'all now, and it seemed to be 20 years ago, or even 25 years ago. The very 20 whatever. There were not a lot of female writers. You know what I mean? It was very good old boys club, and it's come a long way, and it's great to see. Because we get so much better songs,
Yeah, I try to say, I'm lucky enough now to get to write with Hillary Lindsay, and she was already. I always try to tell her, and she probably is like, stop telling me this, but she was such a trailblazer for me and so many others. She was the one that she was kind of like that young, fresh hope for a lot of us. That if Hillary Lindsay can make it and she can get cuts on anyone, maybe we could too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And she's a badass, and she's a hard worker too.
And she's a mother.
And she's a mom. Yep. It's so great.
Yeah. I think one thing I could talk about being a mom. My Instagram bio is song mom.
Right.
So I don't shy away from the discussion because I think it's culturally really relevant, music business or not. And I think what maybe you were seeing is a generation of women that were raised to think that you could do both. And you're kind of starting to see those things. And maybe a generation of men that were raised to really be supportive at home. Because I always think that the ceiling is how much your husband supports you behind the scenes. Because when you do have kids, I know in our house, there's nothing that I haven't been able to do because Rodney wouldn't help me at home.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah. And so maybe it's a new day in that sense, but I also think mothers are really time efficient and they do a lot more with less time. And when you're, and that really caters to the writing room, right? Because a lot of times you're with an artist for 2 hours and you don't have the luxury to sit there and just feel your way into an 8-hour process that might turn into a song. You're looking at life going, I paid a nanny that I scheduled. I'm paying them this much an hour. We scheduled this whole week. So much went into me getting here, just getting physically in this room, that I think there's an underlying edge of I'm not leaving until we get a song, and I got to get it right now.
I think you're absolutely correct. I've seen it with my wife, Amy. We had our kids when they were little, and she was still working full time. She's always worked full time, but yeah, it does put an edge. It puts a little pressure, but it's really good because it's ultimately it helps all of us value our time. What are we doing? And as we've talked about on this podcast a lot, there may be a 2 or 3 hour window in which most of the song, if it's going to be good, is going to, the 8-hour time slot is a luxury you may or may not have to have, Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Zoom this year has really shown that. I'm sure you guys have talked about this on here already, but there are diminishing returns after about 2.5, 3 hours.
That's right.
Zoom. And so I think we all became pretty quick to the idea that you can't spend the first 30 minutes not being productive, because that's the 30 minutes you need on the back end to be able to get the bridge and get the song done before everybody's brains are fried from staring at the screen. So I'm curious what it's going to look like when we do get back in the rooms, because are we still going to keep that tempo, or are we going to resort back to that more social type of songwriting?
It's a great question. What do you think?
Um, I think, well, I think part of why I think we will go back, I think it'll be somewhere in the middle. I think people are getting spoiled to their time, especially like at home. And so people will be a little bit more likely, more motivated to get out of there quicker when we are in the rooms. But I don't think that we were taking all that time to chat and get comfortable and social in the rooms because it was part of the job. It's because as humans, we crave that connection. And I think that it's gonna almost be like a drug. This is just a prediction, but I think it's gonna be like a drug when we do get back in the rooms and people are gonna go, whoa, I've been starved for this.
Yeah.
And, people are gonna go on a deep dive. I have been doing my flow right now is I'm Zoom writing from Kansas. And then 1 week a month, I'm in Nashville doing in-person writes, which is where I am right now. I'm in Nashville. So I'm about to see a lot of people in person this week. And it does feel like those experiences in person are just so rich that I can't imagine us not going back to it in some capacity. It might not be 5 days a week, but when you get in the room with people that you creatively and personally enjoy, I don't think anybody's going to be in a hurry.
No, I agree. And just even though I think it's going to be good that it will teach us, the Zoom thing will teach us to cut some chaff out, just to be in a room and jam a little bit. I mean, I think for me, like the next time I'm able to sit in the room with the Warren Brothers for like 3 hours and play music and hit record, whether they're a great song or not, I mean, that's like that's some of the most fun I ever have had. So I'm definitely, and I know, similar. Now you said something, I want to move to it. You grew up in Sterling, Kansas. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
What, is that close to Kansas City or is that out in the middle of nowhere?
It's not. It's 3.5 hours from Kansas City.
Okay.
And so it really is in the middle of nowhere.
Wow. Now, do you live there? Do you have a place there now? Or
yeah. So we built a house there, I guess like 4 years ago. We finished it 4 years ago. And it was kind of it was a multitude of things, but one of them was that Rodney was going back all the time and hunting. And I just, in my parents' house just wasn't big enough for everybody. And I was like, you know what, they were building a house and I was like, can we put one next to you? So we're giving our kids that small town summer. That was really our goal, was to spend a month there in the summer. And now we've been there since March of last year. We're going to be there for 18 months, I think, straight by the time it's all said and done.
Wow. So you had a place to go. That's great though. That's great because I'm sure it's a little more relaxed out there in the country. You're not worrying so much about the virus and everything.
Yes.
That's fantastic. Now, did you grow
to learn and to
go ahead?
To kind of like, I was just going to say to learn to be creative with a different flow, like to come back and forth in and out of town. Should I ever need to do that again? I know that I can do it.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, did you grow up listening to country music?
Yes. It's really all I listen to. I always say like I listen to country music and Amy Grant.
Okay.
So I was destined for Nashville,
Yeah.
My mom and I were super fans as I got older, like really about like fifth grade on, like we were like the fanny pack at fanfare, mother and daughter, like that. My first time on an airplane ever was to Nashville to go to fanfare at the fairgrounds.
And who were you headed to see first?
Oh goodness. Well, I mean, in hindsight, the Dixie Chicks were my number one, but early on, it was all of them, all of them, Trisha to even Kenny Chesney back in the day. But I loved all of them. Joe Diffie, even the ones that like weren't even huge. I remember loving the Kinleys.
Yeah, I did a lot of work with it. I spent about once a week for a year with the Kinleys. I actually I wrote with them.
Tell me about that.
Well, they were recording I think, did they make 2 records or 1? I don't remember. I got involved with them. Yeah, maybe on the second record. But we wrote a bunch of songs. I think I got something cut on their record, but I actually went out on one of their tour dates in Kansas with them.
Oh, wow.
Time.
Well, there's a good chance that I was in the audience.
You might have been there. Amy loves, I'll tell it. I don't think anybody cares. They were fighting terribly. And I was on this bus, and I mean in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, Colorado border maybe. And Amy calls me, and I couldn't write because they were fighting so much, and she said, well, how's it going? I said, pretty good. She goes, what is? I said, well, it's a little like hell with windows. And that came off the Kinleys bus. Now I have to say, I love both those girls, and I actually ran into one of them last year who's working as a nurse, and they are sweetheart people, but they were, siblings.
Well, 10, 20 years from now, I will tell all the same stories about the artists that I write with now. That's that right. I like that, but not right now.
Do it right now. You got to wait till they retire.
Yes. Hey, I got to say, like, I have a lot of empathy and grace for anyone that's in a duo or a group. I mean, it's hard enough to really like figure out how to use your voice and creative tools as a solo artist. But I try to tell this to Lady A every time I write with them. I'm like, I'm so in awe and have so much respect for how they make their room work. Because they're all so different, and they all have found their lane in the room. And man, I know it's not perfect, and I know it's not without a lot of work and conflict along the way, but I mean, you got to hand it to them. It's hard to be in a band. Oh,
more good God. Yeah. And not just to be in a band, but then throw everything they have to do on top of it. Constant 250 days a year that they're gone. If they're trying to raise their kids, keep a marriage going, it's a tough, I think the writer's life is the better one. But, 100%. As you know, there are people that's their thing, and they need to do it. But do you still make records yourself? Or you?
No, I didn't grow up wanting to be an artist. I never really sang. The only reason I sang was because singing was really out of necessity because I was writing. I grew up playing classical piano and was kind of always that girl. I would play for the other girls. I was the accompanist that played for the other girls that were singing. And then I got to Nashville and started writing. And I was writing pretty privately for that reason, because I wasn't quick to jump in the room and sing in front of anyone. So in hindsight, it really expedited my growth, because I was writing only 100%ers for first couple of years that I wrote. So I didn't really have anyone else to lean on but myself.
That's great.
So anyway, that's a long story. That's a long way of saying that I like performing I've never had the performance bug. I definitely want to make my own record now, though. I really want to have something to hand to my kids someday where I can say, this is who I was. Mm-hmm. It's still kind of, as much as I really care mainly about what I make and not my image, it still kind of bothers me that, like, when you Google my name, the first thing that comes up is like my 2 minutes on The Voice. I wish that like something that actually had, my voice and words attached to it, really, to hand on, like, should something happen to me tomorrow, I would hope that my kids could have something in, this is who she was in song form.
Well, then you need to get busy, because I think that's a great idea. And I think you're absolutely right. I think everyone should, and I think you especially. And also think of how much fun it would be to go on that journey with yourself about what records you would make and what kind of songs would you do. And I've never seen a songwriter make a record that didn't get a bunch of damn cuts off it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if this year's taught me anything, it's like how to get back to pure creativity, and doing things as if life isn't going to last that long. Living with a sense of creative urgency of like, I have to do this. I can't wait for this to happen. I need to make this exist because who knows? And that was it's something that's, this exact project has been something that I've always like had in the back of my mind, but it was never really the right time. And I honestly think I needed to be a mom. I needed something bigger and more important outside of me to inspire me to do it. I didn't want to do it just so I could hear myself sing my songs, know, and I think having my kids now getting to the age where we're having some big family discussions about, so tell me like about our family history and like, where did you come from? And that kind of thing. And I don't think it's an accident that I'm feeling more of that pull to put my life in song, as they're asking some of these questions,
Well, I think it's critical. I want, we've just met right now, but I've seen this urge come and you should roll with it. That's what I'm saying. Don't blow it off. Listen to that little voice. It's a great thing to do because everyone should do it. I have a question for you, a little bit off topic, but I don't really, not to bring it up other than I'm just curious. You have 2 writers in your household, same as I do with my wife. Do you, and not to get into that, but I'm just curious, do y'all write together? How do you balance that? I'm kind of curious of that dynamic. Are y'all competitive or not competitive, or how does that all work?
Well, first of all, I love talking about this because I think that I do realize that we have a unique kind of dynamic in our house. And even more dynamic now because Rodney's son, Brad, who is my stepson, is also having hits as a songwriter. So there's a lot to navigate there. When Rodney and I got married in 2007, I had just signed my publishing deal. So I was a baby writer. He was, he's older than me in age, but also in music years. So he was ahead of me in the game a little bit. And he knew that I was wildly independent and pretty bullheaded about wanting to make my own way. And so we just decided when we got engaged that we weren't going to write. So because he knew my personality and he said, I know that it wouldn't be, I know how, even if you wrote 95% of the song and my name was on it, I know that it would still be Rodney Clausen and his wife. That's who wrote that song.
Well,
because
and just
I hadn't made a name for myself yet.
Let's keep this up, but for context for the audience, her husband, Rodney, at this moment was just killing. I mean, just like crazy on fire.
He was getting going.
Not that he's not now, but he's like, was
no,
just
but he was, well, he wasn't even like really like he had maybe like had like 2 hits when we got married.
Okay. Well, sorry.
He was really, but he was like, everything was just about to pop off for him,
Right.
And he was definitely ahead of me in the game. And so we didn't write for the first 10 years we were married. And he went on to have 20 something number ones in that time. And about 5-6 years into our marriage, I started having hits.
Yep.
And so about 10 years, we looked at each other and we thought, okay, the monkey's off the back. Like there's no one's ever going to say you're just Rodney Clausen's wife anymore. Right. And I think we were also like creatively inspired to try it. Like it was one thing that became really interesting is like, if I would write with Ross Copperman and he would talk about what it's like to write with Rodney. And I would be like, I'm the only one in town that doesn't know what it's like to write with him. I don't know his nuances. I don't know what time he likes to order Edley's barbecue. Like all these people knew that part of his life. And I think that we both, and the same with me, I think it got to a point where we were writing with all the same people as our community tends to do. And we were both a little bit like out of curiosity, like I wonder what would happen. So, so there was one day that Ross Copperman and I had a third that we needed a third. Something happened last minute. Someone dropped out, and he had always been kind of like poking at me, like, I want to be the one in there. I want to be the one that sees what happens when you guys write a song. And so we did, and Luke Bryan cut it.
That's amazing.
We wrote this song called Win Life, and it wasn't a single or anything, but I think it was pretty special for us personally, just to have something that had both our names on it that would live on forever. And so we've written a little bit more since then, and I think we're about to have another song come out soon that we both wrote on, and I think it has a really good chance of actually being like our first radio single together. So it's really sweet that we waited, and yeah. And I know that's fantastic. Like, we're really good friends with Jesse,
right. That's
and
right.
John, and
John.
And I've, whenever we sit at a round, we've done quite a few rounds with them, like two couples, and they sing together, and they have perfect harmony, and they have all these songs that they wrote together. And sometimes I'm just like, oh, I would love to have more of that. And so I'm trying to invite more of that into our house. You asked if we're competitive. We're both very competitive. But I think one of the greatest things about our marriage was that it forced me and both of us to really be excited for the other one. Like, we were on very different timelines, very different trajectories. And it just seems like when he's on, I'm not. When I'm on, he's not. And it's honestly just made me a better human, being like learning how to be purely happy for someone that I love, and learning that something happening for him is not something that is taking from me.
Right.
And maybe that's how and honestly, in hindsight, maybe that's how I ended up kind of like in such a champion mindset or a champion role, because I get kind of, I don't know, called that a lot. Like, you champion so many people, and I don't even feel like I'm champion. I just feel like it's so natural for me to be excited for someone else that's technically my competition, because I've lived with my competition for 15 years. And it's just so beautiful. It's a more pure kind of, honestly, it's what Nashville is built on, is like, we're all in this together. Yep. And that's how I feel like we are in our house. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud that our kids know that we're both competitive, but that we can still love each other through all of it. We've never had a fight over songwriting. We've had some crazy things happen too. Like, there was a time when I had a song called Small Talk that Kenny Chesney had cut and had told us that it was the first single. And then Rodney wrote American Kids, and he cut it last minute and put it out as the single instead of ours. And this is when I had maybe had like one or two hits ever, or singles ever. And Rodney was having like 7 a month. And I was like, really? Just another one for you? But in that moment, it really was like, the lesson was like, if it's not going to happen for me, who else in the world would I want it to happen for? I would want it to happen for you. And in hindsight, and this comes with age too, and like longevity. And I know you've probably had a million of these moments, but you learn that it all kind of like pans out the way it's supposed to. And it's not about keeping score, but the next record, Rodney had he had a couple Chesney cuts, and his songs ended up not making the record. And then he at the last minute cut All the Pretty Girls, and I ended up with the single, And so again, something not happening to you can still happen for you. And that both of those things happened for our house.
Oh, that's right. And what I always say when I get asked the question is, all the money comes to the same mailbox. Mm-hmm. But I love what you said about it. I think it's very beautiful. And the admission, we're all this way. We all have a 4-year-old inside of us. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to get rid of the little 4-year-old who's going to go crazy when your spouse or your friend, or even somebody you don't even know, gets something you want. It can be, but I've learned to I just sit with it, and it passes. And then, you know who you love, and I have some incredible people that I love that are in this business. And there's nothing that's going to let me let myself get petty and not be happy for them. And like, I love what you said also. Someone else doing something doesn't take away from me. It's got nothing to do with me, and like you said, what comes around goes around, and it, It could all change in a month. And I'm so glad to hear y'all are writing together.
We are.
That's
fun.
awesome.
It is fun. It's pretty, it's not very frequent, but that makes it more special. But we schedule it like, it's not like we are writing like on a Friday night, like drinking wine around the piano casually. It's still like, if we write, it's on the book, like a proper co-write with someone else. And it's kind of fun.
I think that's the way to do it, because otherwise you can be like, well, we'll write tomorrow night, and then one of the kids is having trouble with their grades in school, and you're fighting with, and it's very difficult to separate all that. It's very good to put it down in the book.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Pitch List will be right back. Let's talk about this a little bit. In the writing room, what are your strengths? Or let me ask another way. What's your favorite way to contribute to a song?
Oh gosh. Well, I love what is known as, or I don't know who said it first, but the architect phase. I love the
blueprints,
the title to the first line of the song the most. Mm-hmm. I love talking through 20 different ways to write an idea or to write a hook and to organize it. Because I truly think like if you have a great architect process, the rest just kind of, works itself out. And I think that if you don't have a great architect in the room, or the room hasn't architected the song,
yep.
Right? You
can have all kinds. You can get lucky, but you're probably going to have problems.
Yeah, I love like just plotting that out. I'm pretty type A for a songwriter, type A for anyone, but especially a songwriter who's, usually it's like a little bit more in your feels, but I'm probably a little more head heavy in terms of just making sure that we have marks to hit so that we don't get to the edge of an idea and it just falls flat because we didn't plan it out right. But as the longer you write, the easier that process gets. You feel real flexible, even if you get to the end of the verse chorus and you realize, wait, I think our chorus is actually our verse, and I think this needs to be this. Like the longer you do it, the less you have to be locked in to the original plan too. You can pivot, and so that's my favorite part.
Let's sit on that. That's such a great note for the writers listening who are maybe in the beginning of their careers or somewhere there. Because, if we get in a room, it's going to be a newer writer who's more likely to really get freaked out if we go, that first verse really is, and start doing major parts changing. They're in the beginning of your writing career, there tends to be these things where they wanted to like nail this down, and then we're going to nail this down. And then someone like you comes, and I do this too, comes behind and starts ripping stuff up, and you're like, hey, we already built that. And you're like, yeah, but you know what? It wasn't straight. You see that? And it's going to screw the house up way down here, and let's talk a little bit about the idea of keeping it loose, and.
Yeah, I think, well, my first thought on that is that when you're trying to force, like you referenced, like a young writer, or maybe all of us when we, at some point, or even on any given day still, we get afraid that we're not going to finish something.
Right.
And I think that you're operating out of fear. I think it's really like true confidence in your own skill, and also just in the creative swirl. When you've done it a million times, like, okay, I feel confident enough to like hold this a little more loosely, knowing and letting it land. But yeah, I mean, the flip side of that though is there are some times when you're writing with an artist, and a lot of artists are pretty quick on, they don't have a lot of time. And I think there are a number of artists that can quickly doubt the process, or they can doubt the whole song when you stop for too long.
Yep, absolutely.
And so sometimes, which that's a whole other podcast, is learning how to navigate the social side of, there's two processes going on, right? As a songwriter, it's we're making sure everyone in the room is happy. We provide that service. And by happy, I mean like feels good about what we're doing. You're enjoyable to be around. This was worth my time. That's game one. And then game two is actually creating a song that matters. And I think sometimes there are times when I know this could be better, but I'm gonna lose the artist if we spend any longer on this. So let's call this good, put a little scotch tape on it, or a little like in the back of my mind go like, okay, we'll come back to that, but making sure that they enjoy the process, and that everyone, including me, enjoys the process. I think that's the older I get, the more that has become the main priority, because if you think that you only have one chance to write with an artist for the rest of your life, you're going to treat it one way. If you give them a good experience as a collaborator and they enjoy the process, and maybe for them getting a song every time they write with you is part of their process, I think you give yourselves more times at bat with that person, because they're like, oh, Nicole's not going to make me sit there for 45 minutes figuring out these 3 words. So, I know I always get a song and I always have a good time. That's what I think keeps people coming back. And then, because we don't get to pick the day that the magic happens, but I think that as I've gotten older, just making that a rich process has become more the priority.
Smart. That's smart. That's how it works. And I would call that also reading the room. You could run into an artist who loves to dig in and just, no pain, no gain. You can get that type of person too. And with them, they love to get down there and, fight about one word for an hour. But a lot of, you got a lot of short attention spans, and you got to read the room. And I love your breakdown there. You've got two games going on at once. One is, and it's true for your co-writers too. If you're a new writer or relatively new, you want to leave your co-writes with your partner going, wow, that was great. Mm-hmm. I loved working with them, and I think we got something that's really great. You need that positive experience to happen in a writing session. We've never really talked about that on this podcast, but I'm making notes because that's a great note. I mean, just the vibe of a session is so important, versus just getting a great song, which obviously you have to have, but the vibe and everything it's critical. It's absolutely critical. And it gets more critical with the artist.
And honestly, this is something that I think Rodney said the first time, but he said, you want people to write with you because they just enjoy it. You'll have more luck on the tail end of, a long career, because people just want to write with you because they enjoy it, not because you're having success.
Right.
And I think you probably end up like ringing in a few extra hits at the very end, because people just want to be around you. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that to say like, don't be who you are and don't be true to yourself in the room so that people like you. But I do think that ultimately, like, the need to be right, or the ability to be a good partner or a teammate or collaborator in the room, that's just as much of the growth journey as becoming a good lyricist or a good melody person or a good track guy. I think if those skills don't develop, they're going to set the ceiling for how high or how long your career can go, because ultimately everybody slows down in terms of success. Like, it just happens, but you still are going to get those calls to write if people love being with you. And that's what I hope for my sunset years is that I get to write with people just because we enjoy each other.
Yeah. And that as you write longer, more years, you'll want to write with people that you enjoy writing with. Mm-hmm. And, I was listening to you say that works for a marriage, a business. That's just human politics, really. And it's, but it is basic to our business. And and I know that we both know people that we could say names that these type of people, now they're wildly talented, but in addition, people just want to hang out with them. They're just that much fun and that rewarding to be around,
Yeah, I think it just depends on what kind of legacy or, what your metric is. And I think we can all have success. We can all have number ones or moments or mountaintop moments by using different metrics to get there. And I think for me, just like going, how can I have a rich process today?
Mm-hmm.
If that's my metric. I can almost set myself up for success every day at the end of the day, if that's my goal. And then the songs will come. I trust that the songs will come. But if I can have an enriching day, creating, pushing myself, trying to push the envelope, learning from someone that's younger than me, having a deep talk about if any of that, it could be a number of things that makes the process rich. But if that's what I'm chasing, I feel like I can ring the bell still occasionally, but enjoy my everyday, because I'm, as we all know, like as you get older, like it's not that having hits doesn't matter and you're not proud and it doesn't blow you away, but you realize, like, did this really change my life as much as it changed my life when I was 25? No, because for me, like, it's like, if I'm gonna, my values have changed since I was 25, so my values in the songwriting room had to change in order for me to have longevity as a writer, especially once I became a mom, because just looking at my kids going, I need to go make more money is not a good enough reason.
No, it's too,
when
yeah,
I leave them every day. I have to say, this is something bigger, and here's why. This is inspiring that I'm leaving.
Well, and also I think it's too hard a thing to do it for the money. You know what I mean? It's like the idea of I'll go write some hit songs and make some money. That's not going to work. It's not, it's too hard. There's too much magic involved. There's too much. I mean, it's just, no, that's not, you gotta be in that room because you love music and you love songs and, drive, passion, or what, competitive. That's all great. And you need that too, but you can't be doing it for the money. I've never seen that happen. I've never seen that work.
No, I mean, I've seen that work. I've never seen it end well.
Okay. Better said. Yeah.
I think you can have a lot of years of happiness by feeding off of that, but then you've set yourself up for a life where you don't know how to be happy without it. And that's so sad. It's like, imagine like someone in the NFL that won the Super Bowl 30 times. Mm-hmm. And then when they are done, they're the most bitter and unhappy and feel like they failed because everyone's career ends at some point. No, like NFL quarterbacks, they're like, look, I rang the bell. I did it. I won the lottery.
Right.
But songwriters don't know how to. Songwriters don't, if they've lived on, I'm only as good as my next thing. Mm-hmm. At some point that runs out for everyone. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And the way it kind of, every career is different, everything's, but you do see patterns. Typically a writer will get hot mm-hmm. and stay hot for several years, mm-hmm. even off, and then kind of go back down into the pool. Mm-hmm. And then either you won't hear from them again, or they'll pop up with a song, go back down, pop up with a song, go back down, pop up with the song. And that like over a year or two or even three. Mm-hmm. And then you don't know how long that's going to last. I started the season out for us this year with Whispering Bill Anderson, who's had hit songs in like five decades. So, and maybe 6, I don't even know, but it's like, so it's possible. That's the amazing thing is it is possible. Let's talk about one thing we love, because I love these stories. It sounds like, so you came out of Kansas, went to Belmont. Mm-hmm. How long out of Belmont before you got your deal with Warner Chappell? Did you get signed pretty quickly?
1 year.
Okay, well that's crazy.
Which is crazy.
That's not normal. But no. You were really good. I can already tell that, right?
Oh, thanks. Well, I think in hindsight, I think why I got a deal so early was because I was writing 100%ers. And so I think you could tell, even if the songs maybe weren't all songs that could get cut, you could tell exactly what I brought to the table as a writer because I was doing it all. So there was no like hiding behind other names, other co-writers, you know, like someone turns in a 3-way, you don't know who did what, but you knew exactly what I was doing. And I think it expedited my getting a deal. Now in hindsight, and I've often thought about this, I had a publishing deal for 5 years before I had a single.
That was that's on my list. So 5 years.
So 5 years of having a publishing deal.
Right.
So in some ways you could argue that maybe I did get a deal too early, you know?
Well, it seems like Amy and I've analyzed this. Year 5 is typically the magic year of songwriting college. And then did you start having hits regularly, or did you have another dry spell?
I had a couple. So my very first hit was We Were Us. It was Miranda Lambert, Keith Urban.
Great song.
Then right after that, so that like went up and down, like that went number 1. And then and I think that went number 1, like in the fall of whatever year that was. And then maybe like 2 months later, Automatic came out. So I felt like I had like the 1-2 punch, which is really like, I had that gift because a lot of people work for 5-10 years as I did. That was my year 10 when I had my first hit, my year 10 in Nashville. And they have that first hit and it goes number 1, and then they're just scared to death they'll never do it again. And I was really lucky in the sense that, you know, there was this big buildup to me ever having one thing, and then it was just kind of like, okay, you did it twice. Now the monkey's really off the back.
Right.
And then it did, and then I had like a couple things, and it kind of slowed down on the singles front. Like I was getting cuts, and I felt like I was really like that was really keep giving me momentum of like, so-and-so cut your song. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that, you know, like you go from not getting no cuts for 10 years to like getting a cut every couple months. And you're like, oh my gosh, like I've gotten by on crumbs of hope. I can get by on this forever. But there were a couple years where it did slow down. And then I forget what year it was, but it got to like, there was a year where I had like 5 singles at once. And not all those songs went number 1. In fact, I think I had like a year where I had 3 songs go to 13. And that's a beautiful thing too, that you've probably talked about on here, is like, that's a level of success when you start having a lot of songs that don't go the distance, because it means you have more horses in the race. And and I wasn't ready for that. And that honestly was that was harder than not having anything, I think.
Really?
Was going, like, I could see like, if I could just have one single, I could wrap my mind around like what that would look like. Oh, wow, if I could just have one, or in the early days, one hit, like I would imagine my number 1 party. And I would imagine like seeing it on the Billboard, you know, at the top of Billboard and all that. What was harder for me was the year that I had like 5 singles at once, and I let myself actually think about what it might mean to have that many number 1s in a year.
Okay.
And then I lost like 3 or 4 things at once. It was the most true loss I think I had ever had as a songwriter, because there was nothing to lose in the beginning. I wasn't gaining anything. I just wasn't getting anywhere. But and Rodney said it the best. Gosh, you should have him on here, because he just says the best stuff. And
I want to. I'm going to.
That's a big reason why I think I have sustained in Nashville, because his wisdom, it's not because we write together, but his wisdom. But I remember him saying, you know, people don't believe it, but even though you're playing in the Super Bowl, it hurts just as bad to get hit. Doesn't matter if you're in Little League or the Super Bowl, like it still hurts to get hit. And that's what he would say to me when my song would go to 13. And he's like, remember, you know, he's like, you're in the big leagues now. It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt just as bad, maybe even more, when something doesn't happen, because you know what you're missing now.
Yeah.
I was used to being told no in the beginning.
Right. It's all, maybe, and also about expectation, what your expectations are. And you can get vulnerable because you've had the success, and then all of a sudden you got 5 singles coming out, plus everyone around you, the people you work with, your publisher, everybody's like, look, oh my God, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And, you start to, I get it. But what I wanted to ask you, so, but between college, so you were in Nashville 10 years before your first hit, right?
Yes.
So there's your 10-year overnight story.
Yes.
I love to talk about struggle. Before your first hit, did you ever get, what were there low points? Were there times when you're like, this isn't going to work, I'm going home, I'm going to have to go back to Kansas? Or tell us about that.
Yeah, I had a quarterly pity party to Rodney, usually around bedtime.
Yeah.
Which husbands always love to talk about. What are we doing with the rest of our lives?
Right.
At midnight. But yeah, I mean, I felt it all, and I allowed myself to feel the struggle. I wasn't one of those that pretended like I didn't care. Like when something was on hold and I thought they were going to cut it, and then it almost did, but it didn't, I would cry. I mean, I would allow myself to really grieve it, because that's just my personality. There's some people that are like, oh, it's, they're too cool to show how much they really wanted it. But I remember Rodney kept saying, he would but he doesn't say a lot, but he said to me, he's like, so what are you going to do then? What are you, okay. So so this is hard. So it's not happening fast, so what would you like to do now? And I never had an answer. I never had another answer. And I honestly, on a spiritual level, there were some periods in there where I prayed for God to just take that desire, that ambition, that want to be a successful songwriter off of my heart. Because if I could make peace with that wasn't what I was supposed to be doing, I would have. There's so many other things that I think I could be good at. And I have a lot of other passions, but in my heart of hearts, I knew in my spirit that was what I was supposed to be chasing. Now, the big question was, I never felt like there was a guarantee I was going to make it. I just had peace that I was supposed to be chasing it. And that's what I was supposed to go after. And I think I adopted that idea at some point, and it really started to help me of okay, that's all you're responsible for is the chasing. You're not responsible for when the stars align, and it's not your fault if it doesn't happen tomorrow, and it's not your fault if it never happens. I just came to terms with, this is the path I'm supposed to be on. And I'm so thankful that it took that long, as is so cliche. Everyone says I couldn't enjoy any of this. And I also don't think that I could, be the kind of mentor or big sister to some of these other artists that I am, because I can honestly look them in the eye and say, I survived it this long, and it happened for me. I believe that it might take a long time for you, and you will be okay. I'm okay. I survived that. You can too. Don't quit. But if it happened for me in 6 months, I would feel like a fraud telling some girl that's been in town for 8 years, keep going. Because had I not proven to myself that I could keep going, I don't know that I could say that to someone else now. So that's been a really cool thing that I can now pay forward, is the confidence in others that they can survive the struggle.
That's good. And they can also take hope. And I mean, not hope was the right word, but someone as talented as you, it still takes this much. And believe me, your husband, Rodney's a great, great songwriter, but I bet, and I know he's got an interesting story, and I would love to have him on the podcast. He came to Nashville later in life as a second career.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing he wrote a lot of songs back in Texas. You know what I mean? You've got to put those years in one way or the other. You really do. And I think it's great for people to hear that you worked a long time and you didn't know. And because you're right. I mean, it's not, even if it does happen overnight, we could probably both sit here and come up with some names, people who ran into town, had a big hit, decided that the universe is telling them they know what they're doing, and then leave 5 years later because nothing else happens, because they're a terrible co-writer because they know everything and they don't.
Yes.
There's lots of different examples, but the hard work is the only, and you know, it's like 10,000 hours to master anything, right? Or get close. It's kind of like that, really.
Well, and I just think humility is such a big piece of creativity.
Talk about that. How so? How so?
Because I think if you think that you're solely responsible for your success, then you also think you're solely responsible for your failure. And so as a songwriter, we know every day when we walk in, there's a really good chance. I mean, even let's say like who has the most hits in the history of time? Ashley Gorley, right? Like even if you have 10 number ones in a year, that's still 200 songs no one really heard that you wrote that year in this big scheme of things. So if you think you're solely responsible for how the number or like what's going to work and what isn't, you're setting yourself up, in my case, for like 100 songs a year that I'm a terrible writer, you know? And so I think you end up more confident the more humble you can remain in the room and go like, this is all bigger than me. And I need to and really want to and trust that all of us in the room are making this great. Whether you're 18 and have only written 5 songs and you're 55 and you've written 20 number ones, and no matter who you are, you can learn from someone in the room and know that like what the 2 or 3 or 4 of you are going to make that day isn't solely on any of you. It was like this bigger creative force that set you up for success. And I think that kind of humility is what is honestly the only way that I know to sustain all the beating up that happens to your heart along the way. Is knowing like, that wasn't about me. Like when something does happen, it's like, well, that wasn't completely about me. Like I was there. I'm proud that I showed up. I'm proud that I work hard, but also that's not about me if my song goes 13 and I think that it was Song of the Year.
Yeah. And you know what? It's a great attitude. And it's actually true because I'm sure you've had the experience. I tried to tell someone the other day, and it sounds weird, but I'm like, any song I've been a part of that did well, usually the song's better than I could actually do. Somehow it got way better than I am. And people say, well, that's bullshit. That's not, but it's really true. I mean, we are vessels for this. And I love to talk about it as a vessel, but you've added another layer on for me that I absolutely love, which is, you know, it's a good way to look at it. Removing your ego, which we all know, if you get in a writing room, as much ego as can be peeled off of everyone in that room is how good the song's going to be, pretty much.
Yes.
But also letting go of all that and not being in charge, man. It's smart. It's smart. I love it. We're getting a good class here. That's good. Really good.
But you know what? What's so funny is everything about songwriting is about balance, of keep staying in the balance, because while it is about not being in charge, I also think flip side of that is you need to have an adult in the room at all times on some level. Like you need to have someone that is going to keep you on track and not keep things above board. And so, you know, it is balance.
Yeah. And you need shamans to conjure magic. Once conjured, you need someone in the room who can get it in a jar and get the lid on it.
Yes.
Right. And get the right bow on the package. Yes. And if the artist doesn't drive a red truck, make it blue, and whatever else little thing we got to add.
Yes.
You need both. Yes. I want to talk about one more thing, and then I'm going to let you go because I really appreciate your time here.
No rush.
Your pub company and record company. It's called Songs and Daughters, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Your mission statement and everything about that?
Well, it's a partnership with the Big Loud Records team. I was bringing some things that I was working on to Seth England. So over the years, he's been like a brother to me, and I've brought him like artists that I maybe like kind of help produce or work with behind the scenes, and I would come and play something for him and say, "What do you think about this?" You know, and I think that's probably where it all really began. But Seth and I were just talking, we were at dinner, and he's like, you need your own deal. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, you need to have your own. He's like, that's what you're doing. You just need to give helping develop, helping softly A&R, or helping mentor and guide an artist. He's like, you are softly managing or softly A&Ring things. He's like, why don't you just give a formal name to something that you're already doing in your role? And so we started Sons and Daughters. We signed our first act, Madison Kozak, right out of Belmont. And
I know Madison, yeah.
And
great singer.
Yes. And had so many songs that I was like, wow, I would have thought of that. She's a good writer. And I always swore, we then signed Haley Witters, who, speaking of 10-year towns, I mean, there's somebody that's been in town for many, many years, and you can feel it when you work with her. And then I always swore that I wouldn't be a publisher, not because I didn't care about songwriters or songwriting, obviously, but because I knew what it required to give a new writer, especially what they deserved.
Mm-hmm.
Basically a micromanagement daily manager. And I am still managing my own life in songwriting and my kids.
Oh, and you have a family and children, and yeah.
And so I swore that I wouldn't. And then I met Tiara, and it just so happened that she had all these champions at Warner Chapel, where I write. She had all these champions in the Big Loud building, which is where I partner with Sons and Daughters. And all these publishers were like, we want to work with you. And it just so happened that I was kind of like in the middle of all of this, both of these companies. I joke that Big Loud's like my in-laws and Warner is like my real family. And so I was like, let's just do this, because now I had a team that could really take care of like those kind of needs. And so yeah, I'm having a lot of fun, and I'm learning. Everyone's like, oh, you're such a mentor because you work with, younger female artists. And I'm like, I'm the student. If you want, like, I'm learning so much, not just from working with them, but about another side of the business that I've not, I'm on Zoom meetings all the time about marketing and rollouts and social strategy and all of that stuff. And it's, I feel like it's humbling me in a time that it would be really easy to not be humbled on a daily basis.
Well, it's also great to know about those things and the whole artist experience, and all of that stuff goes back to being a great songwriter, as far as, pitching, what artists go through, what they're looking for, any of that I think is really helpful. Now, do you produce also? Do you produce records?
No. Well, first of all, I hate being in the studio. So
okay. Well, then I was going to say you should produce, but that probably not. We need more female producers. What I'm saying is, I know there's a few coming, and I keep checking credits, and I'm a little bit out of the loop on that, but I think that's where we really need to push.
Well, and I will say, like, I'm not opposed to being a producer listed as maybe like an EP on something, being more of the kind of producer where you are like the heartbeat behind the project and really make sure that the project, but I'm never going to be a button pusher or in the studio. That's not my skill set, and it's not my passion. But I think that's probably the next wave of evolution in our business. Back to the very first thing you asked me about, like, women, how do you feel? Is it a male dominated industry? And I do think the last chapter has been, there's a ton of successful female songwriters now compared to how it used to be. And females that aren't just successful with other female artists, like females that are writing everything left to right. And I think that's probably the next thing, is the producers. And you know what? All it takes is one of them having a lot of success for like 10,000 of them, 10,000 young girls to think, oh, I can do that. So we only need a few to really change the landscape for the next generation. Agreed.
Because we won't even get into it. We just agree. I agree with you. And I think all it's going to take is one superstar girl, just a killer track. And I've worked with a couple track girls that are amazing. It's going to happen. It's going to happen soon.
I didn't think I could be a songwriter in Nashville because it was 50-50 female and male. I thought I could be a songwriter because Hillary Lindsay did it. And that was all it took,
Yeah.
So, and she wasn't the only one, obviously,
Oh, right.
There's so many other ones, but you just have to have that connection with one that makes you think, ooh, I see something in myself in that person. And I think I can do that. So hopefully the producer thing will be the same way. And it's with so many things, like, having more, people of color on the charts, all of that. It doesn't take a ton. It just takes a couple to completely break everything open.
It does. And I think country music's in a healthy spot right now. It's a lot of big songs popping through, which was not, you had a huge song with Tequila. Man, that thing was a pop hit too, right? It's giant.
Yeah.
I'm loving seeing those kind of things because that brings all the music business back to Nashville, it's looking. And I think there's going to be, I was just watching CMT this morning with Amy and I was like, wow, I saw like 2 artists I was not aware of that were amazing. So that's really good.
Yes.
I think things are in a good spot.
I agree.
Well, hey, Nicolle, thank you so much for being on our podcast.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this. I would have loved to have had a resource like this when I was a new writer or just a fan, honestly.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's the reason I started doing it. That's still the reason I do it. My little mantra is I try to make a podcast that I would have wanted to listen to when I first moved to town. Real practical knowledge, not like the crazy things you hear, but real knowledge. So
I love this because it's about the process. I do so many podcasts and I tell the same story that we spend like the first 25 minutes talking about the same, how'd you get here? And
right.
This is a really more compelling conversation, which is like, what are you doing now that you're in the rooms?
Right. Well, every interview I've done, it's like a co-write. It has its own little life based on the person I'm talking to. And I try to, if you go into a co-write where you're just going to follow it, you trust this person, you're just going to follow the muse. And that's what I try to do. I just let it go where it wants to go. And then I'm as interested as everyone else is in what you have to say. I've only known you. I've met you before, but we've never really hung out. And I only know you from your music, and it's always great for me to get to talk to someone and because that's only one side of a person. And it's just great to get to hang out with you for an hour.
Same. I enjoyed it so much.
So thanks for being on Pitch List. This is Nicolle Galyon, mega hit Nashville chick, writer, lady, mom, superwoman. Check out her stuff. I'll put an intro and put all your stuff in. And thank you for being on Pitch List.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pitch List, produced in partnership with the American Songwriter Podcast Network. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcast or your preferred listening platform. And if you want, feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and review. For exclusive content from this week's guest and more, you can visit our website at pitchlistpodcast.com or follow our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. To hear songs written and or recorded by today's guest, check out this week's playlist by finding us on Spotify at Pitch List Podcast. Plus, don't forget to let us know on social media what songwriter, musician, or music business professional you want to hear from next. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.